let's go ahead and get started. I know you'll have a few more folks rolling in, so I'll let you add them in, Doug.
Absolutely.
So today, the title of today's session is Agile versus Waterfall versus Kanban. We're actually going to talk a little bit about Lean, which Kanban is derived from. So we'll add that topic. So as always, subscribe to the YouTube channel. All of ours are uploaded now, and again, they're edited down for everyone. If you have any questions about the topics we've covered, you can use the Ask AKF. It'll pull from our blog posts and our books. So, all right. So today's session, the idea is we want to have you think about your current workforce, and your workforce is all of your humans and machines, and it's primarily that roll up to you as a CTO, also from product, and in some ways, the entire organization if you are in a software as a service company. So a lot of folks have the mind shift of how do we just keep doing more? So how do you cram 10 pounds of stuff into a 5-pound bag? Think of whatever stuff that is, good or bad, to pulling value through the system smoothly. And you'll hear this term pulling quite a bit throughout our chat as we get into this as a lean concept. But you want to pull it through and think of, again, the workforce as a large factory floor just shipping out value. So we're going to start with the shift left and the types of work patterns. By show of hands, how many of you have heard of the term shift left? Good.
Couple of them.
Yep. Madhan, do you want to share what the term shift left means to you?
So from our perspective, shift left is to get the feedback fast, fail fast, or just find stuff as early as we develop.
Got it. Very good. Any other definitions from the team? And why we say left?
Hey
Go
guys,
ahead.
it's Chris. The shift left framing for me is more like moving certain important tasks like testing and security to the beginning of the process, the development process.
Good. Yep. And that's a very good view of earlier in a longer process. Have any of you used it as a term of type of people or type of resources as a shift left thinking? Right, we're going to introduce a extension of that, of shift left. So in one aspect, it's really moving resources from an expensive resource also to a cheaper resource. So in some cases, you're describing reducing risk later in the process, pulling it up. In this one, we want you just to think about moving the work from more expensive machines or humans to cheaper resources. And in this case, left, it could be automation software. But the reason we say left also in this term is how we visualized how resources get handed off from one type of resource to another, not just one step in the process. So both definitions are correct, and we want you to add this one to your definition of shifting left. So think of it this way, from a customer request going through a generalist, and if the generalist can't handle the work, it hands it off to a specialist. If a specialist can't do it, it gets handed off to an expert. So as you can imagine, that gets a bit more expensive. So as it gets passed further to the right, that work gets very expensive. And the idea here, from a cost perspective and efficiency, is routine work should be sifted left via self-service or automation. And the goal here is to reserve the most valuable work for your experts. So have any of you seen this definition? All right, we're going to extend it just a little bit more and walk you through this term here. But the idea, again, if you can shift left, you should, and this is for routine work, not all work, but just routine work. If you can shift it from more expensive resources to machines or cheaper machines or cheaper humans, you should get higher revenue multiples as a company. So each incremental improvement you can do, moving from generalists to specialists to experts, anywhere you can save time, whether it's time to onboard, time to self-serve from a customer perspective, deliver new features. If you're responding to a bake-off, those things can pull in a lot of folks, a lot of specialists, a lot of experts. The more that you can save that time, that gives you more chances for at-bats to win more customers and more runs, we call runs scored, which is to close those wins and make more money. So it's also a revenue multiple, and it makes you more valuable. So just also think about the profitability of what everyone is doing, and also how fast you can get through things through a process. So in this one, this is really focused on the resource view. So to expand it a bit here, you might have heard the term tier 1 or tier 2 or level 1 or level 2. In this case, we use the same example, self-service, generalists, specialists, experts, and these are viewing them as tiers. In the example of a bank, we started with the bank teller. That was level 1. And then we added in an ATM. And so that's why we have the shift left. And then we have a loan officer. If it's a special kind of request, a loan officer, as part of their process, may hand off to an assessor. Let me pause there. Sharma, do you have a question, or
Sharma's got a question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I mean, so I guess what you're describing is more from a customer support model where I can think of moving things left towards self-service and so on, versus in a product development model where, I view that as bringing tasks, right? Like earlier somebody said, bringing security tasks and security requirements and all of those things early in the process. So that's overall going to cost me less if I do that right, even though I have to bring in experts early into this process. Am I
Good.
missing
Yes.
something here? Oh,
Yes, that's correct. You're still correct. I'm just giving you another definition. So in your case, you're reducing risk. You're identifying risk up front in your process, which will reduce the overall cost long term. And that's from an overall end-to-end process perspective, that is the correct view. We're just augmenting that view and have you take another lens of also looking at it, not just from each process, but also utilizing your resources and making sure you're getting the right mix of humans and machines. And we're going to show you an example later on that more describes what you described, which is that kind of shift left. So it's two kind of shift left models. And in this case, you may not even think of this if you don't want to combine those models. Just think of this as a tiered resource model. And perhaps
got it.
don't think of a shift left. Just think of it as, I have tiers of resources, and I'm going to walk you through this, and we'll show you the product view of this. This is the bank view, and I'm going to show you the next slide will be the product view. So in this case, your resources are doing multiple kinds of work. They're doing multiple kind of processes. So the teller can handle 10 different kind of requests, but the 11th or 12th request, they have to hand off to the loan officer. The loan officer can do so many items, and then they have to hand off to an assessor. So in this case, it's just viewing it from different tiers of resources. So by number of requests coming in, you would generally like to see this distribution, because this is kind of a Pareto example of most of the most common repeatable things should be able to be done by self-service or a machine, or by your lower cost tellers or your loan officers. And that's by number of requests. But the general relative cost of each request is more expensive. The incremental cost of the free tier, and you have some maintenance there, but each transactional cost should be free to you. And if the tier 1 is 1x of a human cost, or even a human augmented by a machine, it's 1x. But as you get to the next tiers up, these specialists, they're more expensive, either at a per hour basis from a salary perspective, or these are longer processes or tasks that these folks need to do, and so those are more expensive. So the idea here is that's where you're potentially losing money if you're not really allocating the work the right way. So in the banking world, the way that this works is you have what's called a banking core. What we may think of as an ERP is called a banking core. It's the core platform, and you want to have these different tools because banking cores are old, and so they have different modules, just like domains, and they have to work well together. And as they exposed their services and became more digital, they had more of this service catalog concept that we described in the last session, where you steer people naturally through the right tiers. You don't want everybody going to the bank. In fact, nobody goes to the bank anymore. They generally go to the ATM, and then you try to get to these tiers as needed wherever you can. So taking that example, and we're just swapping out from a product perspective, the self-service is your portal or APIs, right? So they are able to access your core product, or this could be your customer-facing system. Tier 1 are customer support people, generally that are your lowest tier, to help you with easy onboarding activities and easy support activities. And then tier 2 is your core team. Those are most of your engineers doing particular work. And then tier 3 is leaders, directors, architects. Maybe you're one infrastructure person, you're one security person. Those are your most expensive people. So using your example, it's still good. That's a very expensive person. You don't want to have them involved late in the process, have them involved earlier in the process, because generally later in a lot of cases takes them from 3x to 10x because there's so much more work to do. They have to unwind a lot of things. So just in this case, think of it more in these different tiers. The way you get there is with Agile and CI/CD, because you don't want to have people redoing common things, but also again self-service, where teams can do what they need to do and not have, for example, tier 1 do work that a portal could do. When you evolve as a platform, your tier 1 might do your basic reports. They'll create a custom report. Over time, you realize, no, we need to have a self-service reporting tool built into our platform and just expose that. Or someone needs access to data more frequently, that's where you need to expose your API or a subset of your API. So in this case, this is what we mean by shifting it from one tier to another tier. And if you don't have that, if you somehow haven't thought through it this way, you've got your most expensive people, typically your core delivery teams doing a lot of work that should be done and push left. So there's a lot of waste, a lot of risk. It means you're going to get behind. Competitors will get ahead of you, either on a quality term or on a feature aspect. And over time, customers and prospects will seek service elsewhere. So let me pause there. Any questions of viewing this from a tiered service perspective and just handing the work off or shifting the work to lower cost tiers? Yeah,
I
go
have
ahead.
yeah. So this feels more like the portal and APIs feel like the ability to scale the service versus actually developing and deploying and delivering it. Is that the right way to say it?
Yes, you can scale the company because you don't have the work that was done before you had a portal or an API was either never done, or it was done by either a customer support team or it was done by a delivery team. I need this special subset of data and it's something bespoke or something unique or supporting it. But yes, it scales the company, right? Because you can now provide and support more customers with the same number of people.
Yeah.
Or machines. So yes, Christopher.
Yeah, so I guess then so what we talked last time about how we have that kind of data science service, right? So I guess, right, I guess this shift left concept, I guess I've been thinking about it. We think about it in a different way, right? You're always looking at ways to, I guess, increase your margins in terms of that. So a lot of times they're creating bespoke models, and I always tell them we find ourselves kind of using some of these methods to produce the reports or the service. Then we look to automate that. So a lot of times we identify patterns, and then we'll create more internal models that go into the engine that run regularly, so they don't have to keep reproducing those methods every project. So I guess that would be an example of this shifting left terminology
Yeah.
kind of.
Yeah, and we'll tie this in later, but in your retrospectives or maybe quarterly, as you look back, these are what you want to measure. These are your lagging indicators and also your future targets, the outcomes you expect to achieve. We haven't yet got into how we're going to solve that, but this is the goal of where you're trying to get to, where you identify you have very expensive people doing repeatable work that could be done, that could be automated by a machine, or you can bring in a lower cost person, a more junior developer, to offload some of that work. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
Cool. All right. So we're going to now weave into what those people do, those expensive types of resources. And we have found at least 4 kinds of work patterns that people do. And there's actually a 5th one, which we're going to show you here. And we'll walk you through these projects, reoccurring programs, on-demand service requests, emergencies. And I'm going to give you just basic definitions of what we view these. So a project, that's something you've done before that has a clear scope and a clear start and an end. And as you're early on, you may not be sure about your tasks, your effort, your duration, your dependencies. It typically requires coordination of a lot of people inside and outside of the company. That's why you typically go through a discovery process or requirements phase to make sure you've nailed down scope. But that's what a project is. A recurring program is kind of sounds similar because there's a lot of tasks, but you do it enough that you're pretty confident in what the tasks are, the effort, the duration, what the dependencies. So it might look like it, if you map it out in a project plan, it looks like a project, but it's well practiced because it's more repeatable and you can start identifying ways to improve. On demand is an extension of that, which is these are common things, the routine, but they might need a lead time, they may not, and you don't know when they're coming in, but you're predicting these as they come in. So this is an IT example. I need a laptop for a new employee. A bigger one might be for your infrastructure team needing to spin up some kind of environment, whether they go into Azure or AWS to do it, but they might need some lead time if they're not given you the ability to just automatically do that. In emergencies, drop everything, get the subject matter experts. You typically should have roles well defined. These often require cross-functional teams. So those are 4 traditional types of work, but the work that most of you are doing is product delivery. Okay. So the goal there is, find a current fit, market fit, and a future fit. You're trying to get feedback as soon as possible, and you're trying to get that feedback so that you can pull away from customers. Okay. So just by show of hands, how many of you are doing only one of these activities today within your team? How many of you are doing now just 2 of these activities within your team?
None.
How about 3 of you? 3 of you, are 3 of you doing only 3 of these activities? All right. Are the rest of you doing all 4 or all 5? Yeah, exactly.
Madan says yes. Christopher says, I
Yeah.
think I am 4.
Right. So keep in mind that the disciplines, 4 or 5, right? So the disciplines to master these are different, right? Product management is, you want to deliver a product, it's the disciplines of Agile, which is how do you prioritize the right work to deliver value. Product management is really focused on the market fit and finding that current market fit. Projects, that's traditional waterfall project management, and program management is the way that we identify dependencies or series of projects. But again, they're well defined, they're repeatable. Reoccurring programs, what helps you there is lean process modeling. As you keep redoing these things, you want to try to lean out the process and identify wasted steps, identify steps where you can move it from a human to a machine, or once you've introduced the machine, you completely bypass some steps. That's lean thinking. And then when you get into on-demand, it's an extension of that, but there's also some operations research theory of understanding how things come in and assigning the work to the right queues and to the right resources. So there's another discipline there as you get better at that. And then lastly, emergencies, the best way to do that is just to practice for these failures and discuss that with the team. How would we respond quickly? You're also trying to mitigate disasters to prevent them from happening, but they will happen, and you need to be able to work quickly to restore service as quickly as possible. So you don't need to master all of these. That's why we're bringing this up here, but we just want you to be aware that your teams are probably doing a mix of these. And if you don't understand the fundamentals of these, your teams are probably inefficient of how they shift work among their time, among these different types of work. So you don't have to be an expert in all these, but we're just going to walk you through some of the basics to help you identify your team, and they can in turn shift the work the right way or think about it the right way. Because if you mix it up, you're going to typically mess up all of them in some cases. And it's hard to see that because, this is what's called the white collar age. We're all on machines. We're working in different tools. It's not like a shop floor where you can see exactly what people are doing, or you're outside in a field and farming where you can see where the bottlenecks are. So it's hard to know where the bottlenecks are in processes. And so we'd like you just to understand and recognize that these are different kind of works and there's different disciplines around that. So as we lay that out over the tiers of resources, we'd like to get to something like this kind of distribution of projects are focused on specialists and experts because they're unique. You're trying to set up something. If it's a repeatable project that's a recurring program, you can shift that work left. Emergencies, you want your experts on the team, your specialists on the team. You don't want them doing the on-demand service requests. You want to shift those again to self-service because you don't know when they come in. They should be repeatable. Products typically involve all tiers because you're trying to build better products and shift that work. So this is just the general distribution of how you'd like to lay out the work across teams. Again, it's just conceptually. You don't have to do the math for your teams, but just want you to understand that you've got humans doing a lot of different activities and just to get them thinking this way. And as a shareholder, you want to try to shift the work this way because that's going to basically make you more valuable. So let me pause there. Any questions or observations on this before we get to the next, where we dig into some of these a bit more? All right. Very good. Well, let's walk through just the key aspects of Waterfall, Agile, Kanban, and Lean. And we're not going to discuss much about Agile because we're assuming most of you are doing Agile and Scrum. Just by show of hands, can we confirm that your primary work activity that you're doing is Agile and Scrum? Yeah, good. Very good. So with that in mind, we're going to just talk a bit more about those others and just do a side-by-side. So this next slide here is kind of busy, but I'm going to break them down and we're just going to focus on a particular column. And that way you can compare them just a bit more.
Christopher's got a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Christopher.
Yeah, hey, sorry, I didn't mean to disrupt your flow there. With the, like, you have it broken down like waterfall versus agile versus Kanban versus lean. I feel like for me, like my conceptual model of that is that like lean falls under agile. It's like hierarchical. Like agile is more of like a broader framework, and like lean is a concept of that. But then Kanban in my mind is lean. It's just more is it's a different framework of agile that honors more of like lean principles. Like I feel like when like the slide I'm viewing, it's like they're kind of exclusive from one another.
No, they're not. There's some Venn
Yeah.
diagrams. And so
Yeah.
I didn't have time to draw the Venn diagram because it was
Gotcha.
two-dimensional. But yeah, that's why you're going to see some repeatable stuff in here where you can see where the Venn overlap is on these, because in some ways, some of these aspects overlap. And that's why we'd like you just to understand these differences, and you can see where one has derived from the other or one has borrowed from the other. So
Yeah, okay, yeah, gotcha. Because I always like I said, in my mind, I always view Kanban as an agile, approach to
yeah.
project management.
So just take these as an agile, it kind of is a superset because it's derived from both Kanban and Lean, if you read the research on that. So you can see its foundations, particularly as I go into just some Kanban concepts and some Lean, and you'll say, oh, that's why it's an agile. And you may know that, but your teams may not know that. And that's why we believe it's helpful to understand both Kanban and Lean backgrounds to really embrace agile.
Sure, great. Thank you.
You bet. So Waterfall, again, the goal is you're delivering something with a known scope by a date. The way you measure it and the focus as you're managing the project is it on time, on quality, on budget, because that's all the work you did up front. It's good for ERP migrations, your core operations of your business, M&A. If you're doing a merger or an acquisition, those are projects. And also what we call D&E, which is divestitures and expansions. Those are also waterfall projects if you haven't done them before. So it's a different mindset than Agile. You really have to define those requirements up front in these situations. And then because you've defined the requirements and you have some known dependencies, you can really schedule things. And then you can understand those dependencies. So that's where Waterfall is still good. The techniques are the work breakdown structure, issue management, risk management, change management. This is traditional Waterfall stuff. The team structure is different than these others that we talked about. Think of the general contractor with subs as you're building a house, and each of those sub teams have unique skills. When you do Waterfall, typically there's a big investment up front and a 20% maintenance longer term. That's just the general term for a funding model. And then the customer involvement, often in Waterfall, and this isn't always say in construction, but in software, it's traditionally been upfront and at the end. Okay. So as you can see, Waterfall does not work well as, for delivering products, but it's very good for known scope things that, a team can just go focus on, get the input up front, go do the work, and then deliver it. So that's where Waterfall is good.
Part
Agile.
of the investment, if I can add to it, part of the large investment is that you're looking at a big bang go live at the end. This is not something that, like an ERP implementation, generally can't be done in pieces. You build the entire thing over the course of a long number of months and then go live all at once with a data migration and a training exercise and go live. So it can be risky.
Yep. And then Agile, we talked about this quite a bit. You're finding a market fit. You're continually readjusting. You're trying to get the feedback from the customer. You're trying to win market share. You're trying to make a profit. That's really the mindset of Agile and product management. This is good for not just your core products, but as you expand platforms that you've bought, like a CRM, a business intelligence, or AI/ML, that's actually good because you're constantly looking for new ways to add automation, to use data to make a decision. And on the CRM side, that is on the funnel side, bringing in business, but also on the support side, because you're pulling in work, and this is feature work on these platforms that we're describing here. The techniques are work in process. You're focused on throughput, automation, and estimating and story points. The team structure, small team with all the skills. As we talked about, you want to avoid a lot of dependencies on a separate QA team, minimize the dependencies on a separate infrastructure team. The rare time you need security, minimize those dependencies. The funding model, it's a team, it's durable. So that's why you see agile teams may not be aware of their cost structure because they're just a team. Somebody's taking care of that. And the customer should be involved in every iteration. That is the goal of Agile. Kanban, similar, but the idea, its background is reducing waste, and its focus was using a just-in-time inventory approach. So the goal is you pull work and you minimize WIP, work in process, and we're going to show you some slides on that. It's good for customer support, bug tracking, if you're not part of a regular cycle. If you do have a separate team, but bugs could be coming in from customers, you prioritize them. That's the Kanban concept. You determine, do I want to put them into this sprint, or do I want to even tackle them this day? Well, what we traditionally call site operations, that's good for Kanban. The techniques there, you minimize the work in process, which is tickets, only a small number of tickets or amount of effort can be open at any time. And the way you monitor that is by looking at what's called a cumulative flow diagram if you don't have the metrics. And we're going to show you that. Team structure, typically a small team with all skills, or you have multiple teams with different skills where the work gets routed to different queues. The funding model, the teams are durable. Customer involvement is daily only because they submit the work, and it could be just the life of the ticket too, of the request that's coming in. They may be up front and at end at a per process, but customers are bringing items in and out all the time, or just the market is bringing those in. Lean, the goal is just improve throughout the entire process, and it's throughout your organization. Your focus is eliminating waste. It's good for repeatable processes, as we described earlier. Anywhere you see workflow, when you're designing an ERP or you're designing even your ML pipelines, this is where Lean is good for, because you're trying to eliminate and reduce waste. It's not necessarily how you do ML work, but it's the focus on improving the pipelines. The techniques which we're going to walk you through, it's the theory of constraints, and we'll describe Tim Wood's. It's a pretty quick thing of how you analyze waste. The team structure, it's typically a tiger team led by an analyst. You typically need an analyst that's very good at doing this. The funding model for these typically upfront, but then as the outcomes, you'll get some short-term and long-term investments. Customers are involved, however you define the customer, as needed. So let me just pause there. Now that you see these, any thoughts that just jump out from you, or any observations before we dig into Kanban, Lean, and Waterfall? All right. So, and if you know these, great. You can use this to teach your team, but we're going to walk you through some of the high-level fundamentals just of each of these here. And I'm going to leave this one. I'm going to go through this one quickly, but for your teams, we have a nice side-by-side of Scrum versus Kanban. But the high level, Scrum is focused on sprints, where the Kanban is you may or may not time box, and your real focus there is pulling the work in. Where with Scrum, the work there is you can't add it in the middle of a sprint. You keep that sprint preserved. Where again, the Kanban, new work is pulled in as soon as something gets done, because you have work in process. That's the capacity that you can handle. All right. So Kanban, just as a reminder, it's the history of this. It was developed at Toyota, and again, the focus was just reducing waste and had this just in time. So you didn't have a lot of things lining up, but it's the idea that the Kanban is the card where people would see the work off a board and pull that work. And so that's why you would pull it from one to another. And that's where you can see the history in Agile of pulling the work from one stage to another. And it's not pushing the work down, but it's as the resource is available, they pull that work in, and that's the goal. You're trying to avoid overcommitting teams. That's why it focuses on minimizing work in process. And the board is to visualize as it goes through, but because you see the board as it goes through over time, you can start to see some bottlenecks. It works well for recurring issues that you want to minimize. And again, the goal is limit the work in process so you avoid that context switching within the team. So cumulative flow diagram, walk you through it quickly. So imagine over day, this could be weeks, but typically in this day view here, this is a view of new, in process, and done. And so it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So you're only going to zoom in on a certain time period as you look at this. So work in process is just the items on a particular time period of what goes on. In this example, day 4 is 2 tasks, but on day 5 and day 6, these are bigger tasks. The team has limited it, but the range is somewhat because it doesn't talk about size here. But they're really focusing on limiting how much work in process there is. The cycle time and how long it takes on average for a task to go from in process to done. Throughput is just how many tasks you get done over a time period. Arrival rate is how fast they're coming in. The departure rate is how fast the done items are leaving, which should be the average throughput. So let me pause there. Do any of you look at cumulative flow diagrams, or does it help you guys understand Agile a bit more for your teams? Because this is the foundation of Agile. So,
This is like I think I spend the bulk of my time at my doing with since I'm kind of doing all this stuff is
good.
this
Yeah.
project management stuff.
Yeah. Good. All right. So we'll walk you through just a very rapid view of lean engineering, which has, again, a pretty big Venn diagram with Kanban, but it's where with Kanban, the focus is I've got a team of resources focused on work, and you're trying to optimize a bit of the discrete tasks that the team's working on, but really just making sure you're preserving the team. The focus there is if I make that team more efficient, I get more throughput, where with this lean view I'm going to show you, it's looking at the processes from end to end, and they may span teams and where are the bottlenecks within a process. So that's what we call it process engineering. So it's one is looking at utilization. This one is looking at overall throughput at the process level versus, again, the team. So it's a different lens. If you look at, you could think of one horizontal and one vertical or vice versa. It's also looking at eliminating waste. You're trying to get learning across teams because no matter how well you try to structure your organization, you're going to have handoffs across the teams. It works well for repeatable processes. Does not work well for Waterfall. And again, the focus is on throughput over utilization. You care about the process getting done as quickly as possible with as few errors versus is everybody working and busy or not. And this should empower the team, similar to Kanban, similar to Agile. It's best understood visually. It's very hard when you document things in Word or Excel, but if you can just see this, these drawings are very good here. And as we'll get to in our next discussion, actually the second one, it's very helpful as a foundation for jobs to be done theory. So the traditional way we've done this is called business process modeling notation. Don't worry about the formality of that. These are tools that came up in the 2000s, even the early 90s, but I'll just show you an example of what it looks like. You can use any graphing tool that you can, but the idea is to show via swim lanes, typically by roles and systems, and some people debate whether you identify systems in there or you depict it a different way. I like to draw it as swim lanes of people and systems so you can see handoffs. So task starts, has a branching structure, and you're just identifying what those activities are. It's not easy sometimes just to get started creating this drawing. And so the way that people do this sometimes will create a form, what's called a SIPOC. So what are the suppliers? What are the inputs? That gives you a definition of what the boundaries are. And it's just helpful to get people that know the process or some of the steps. It helps get some basic terms. Again, you don't have to be very formal about this, but if you're struggling just creating the drawing, creating the SIPOC is very easy. You just ask, what are the suppliers? What are the inputs? The process are the steps and the outputs, but it helps give you value and of each item coming through in the overall process. So you can use special purpose tools if you want to try to do some need analysis, but in your case, you can probably use a nice board. You could use Visio, but I like other drawing tools that where you can quickly move things around, connect things, and draw it quickly if you're not in the same room. The more formal approach is you're looking at min, max, standards of how long each task takes and what percent goes down a certain branch. And if you have a lot of repeatable processes, you do this at scale. You use simulation tools to try to find bottlenecks. Have any of you ever done Monte Carlo simulation to identify bottlenecks in processes? Or even just to look at a project plan? And again, you don't have to. Nope. That's a more advanced one when it's very repeatable. There are tools that will help you analyze where these are. So, and we'll walk you through what Tim Woods means. It's called a waste walk, which is how you identify where the waste is. So again, a repeatable process. It could even be if you're not doing CI/CD, it could help you prioritize CI/CD or help you quantify the value of CI/CD. So Tim Woods, what does Tim Woods mean? It's the 8 types of lean waste. And the idea here is everybody on the team that's doing any activity is supposed to identify what these are. So it stands for transportation, inventory, motion, waiting, overproduction, overprocessing, defects, other underutilized skills. So transportation is the handoff of the work from one team to another. That's considered waste because there's some time element there and there's a handoff. Inventory is things queuing up that are not worked on. That's where you can see the history of Kanban is. If you have too much inventory, that's something that you've paid for longer in the past. You have those carrying costs, and then you're not moving them forward and getting customer payment. Motion is people moving around without doing any work. Waiting is you're just waiting for the item to be handed to you. Overproduction, unnecessary deliverables. This is common as you evolve over time where you created something in the past that you don't need to do in the future. Overprocessing means it's just too hard to do the work. Defects are well known, and just underutilized skills are you've got people that are either idle that could be doing other things or expensive people doing the things that we talked about earlier that should have been done by lower cost resources. So again, movement of the work, that's whether it's a human or machine, the handoff, every time there's a handoff in that drawing, that's a transportation or movement of the work, whether it's documents or people. But any of those crossing the swim lanes is potentially waste. Maybe it could be efficient, but it may be waste. Inventory, files, queues, things in a database that have not been done. So just again, that's very simple to think of. Motion is people in meetings. So for example, right now, you are not delivering products right now. You're in a session, in a webinar. So you're potentially wasting time with respect to what you're delivering, even though you're going to take these valuable lessons and apply them later. Waiting, you're waiting on someone. That's just whether it's you waiting to get the email, whether it's a timer, that's pretty straightforward. And again, overproduction, you create too many deliverables. So this is stuff you might want to deprecate over time. Overprocessing, you might have underutilized components, or your cyclomatic complexity is just too difficult. So it's too hard. You need to refactor your code. And then of course, defects is, anytime you have a defect and it has to start over, and that's very expensive. And then again, underutilized skills. So in the handoffs, you'll see the more detailed text versions of those. So we're not going to walk through those, but it's a more detailed view of what I just walked you through. So, all right. So you've done the process map. You've drawn it out on a board. When we say the waste walk is every stakeholder can, once they know those terms, they can look at those tasks on the board and say, oh, that's motion, that's inventory. In a lot of cases, there's 2 kinds of waste. But where people don't typically see this because when they do these repeatable processes, their mind kind of goes into autopilot and they don't really think that they're wasting time or taking time. And they do it so often that they're basically in cruise control. So this is the self-reflection and analysis. And you'd be surprised when people see this, they can quickly identify waste and they'll identify some of the risks, some of the issues. And a lot of times they'll identify quick wins, things they can do immediately within the team where you don't need to go invest in other tools or in a process redesign. A long-term solution is, hey, we've identified an issue, let's go put it in the backlog and address that later. Or, hey, we've quantified the risk and we really need to have continuous integration. And it really empowers the process owners. And it's often due to handoffs between teams or teams using tools managed by their teams. This enables the process owner to identify how are they being constrained either upstream or downstream. So
Hey, Philip,
go
can
ahead.
you roll back?
Yeah.
If I can add, this is an area where I've spent quite a bit of time in my career. One of the most challenging and difficult things, we don't have one illustrated in what Philip's sharing here, but when you make a decision, if there's a diamond where work flows in and it's a yes, no, or 1, 2, 3, each one of those individual decision points introduces at least one and probably 2 or 3 different types of waste. All of a sudden the work stops. It queues at that point until a decision's made. You've got transportation because you're moving the decision point to another person or another system to help provide information to make the decision. The lesson there is that you try and move the decisions early in the process or at the top of a workflow so that you're not making that in the course of doing the work. It could be physical work, it could be the processing of a pipeline in software deployments. You make those decisions ahead of time and allow the work to flow.
Very good. Thank you, Doug. So recall from the Kanban side, you've got teams doing different kind of work. So often you have multiple processes. And so the same people will do multiple repeatable processes in a lot of cases. So you may need to create a quick inventory or track of your processes, try to identify the frequency, a high level view, frequency, duration, effort, what are the outputs. When we've done this before, a lot of times people don't even know the basics of this. And so they need to do the process mapping, and they initially just may take a pass at, we know we do this once a month, or we do this 10 times a day. And so they can give you a general sense of how many people and how much time it takes. So this is only if you have a lot of more than 2 or 3 processes for a team. And then you go through the mapping that we talked about, you do the analysis and you do the risk analysis. That'll help you determine where to focus first. And then you have your short-term and your long-term opportunities. So that's if you do this at scale or do this across teams. So because you'll have a team that's good at this, they may start chasing other areas of how can I help lean out processes no matter where they are. And again, you'll see this in all parts of your organization. QA could have this in the way that QA does their work. Infrastructure would do this in the way that they do their work. Security does this in the way they do their work. Even designers and product managers should think about this as they are constantly redoing their process. So it's a way to self-reflect on repeatable things that you do all the time. All right, we have about 13 minutes left. We just wanted to walk through just some fundamentals of waterfall and project management. Most of you know this, learned this a long time ago. It's just a refresher, but it'll help you with your team for junior folks that have never learned waterfall before. So as you all know, waterfall, the reason we call it waterfall was you went through these distinct stages of requirements, functional design, technical design, build, unit test, system test, and each stage was an input to the other. So it would fall from one item to the other. The dark blue here is typically a business stakeholder, and the light blue here is IT or delivery engineering leads here. And it's hard if you try to apply waterfall for projects, as you all know, it leads to cost, delays, and often relationships that become fractured. So that's the waterfall view. The V model, which I don't know if any of you have seen this model, but this V model concept was created kind of late in waterfall as we tried to move towards Agile. So the V model is, this is the happy path in the green. The red is the validation that the unit test validates the build. And if you find a mistake in system test, you may have made a mistake in technical design. In user acceptance test, you find a mistake there, you missed it in the functional design. If you find it after go live, you missed a requirement. So everything you find as a bug or mistake on the right side has to go through that cycle again. And that is what
More and
leads
more
to
expensive as you go.
Yes. So it leads to rework, skip steps, and it almost always leads to time and cost overrun. So this is why waterfall projects go late all the time. When you work with, for example, if you're doing it in the constructions phase, when you deal with junior general contractors, they don't understand this very well. They can't really picture how far out these things go. And this is why you don't want to apply waterfall to product delivery. So in product delivery, we go to Agile. The idea is you take this V to an I, and this was how it was described when we moved from Waterfall to Agile. So you would try in those iterations, only do the activities that you need, and you're just tightening that cycle. Particularly with testing, you test the things that you do, and you try to get them through all of your environments. And you may release all the time. You may delay and release after several iterations because you've broken up the work into smaller pieces. And so that's why we use the term the V model. By show of hands, have any of you used the V model before or seen this before visually? Yeah.
Good. Not on
Very
the
good.
boat.
All right. So, and keep in mind, there's a lot of waste, right? And the waste each time in the past, when you would go from requirements to design, every time you rekeyed or translate, there was waste in that because there was typically errors and there was motion going from one to another. And so it really made traceability hard to make sure you go through it. So when people go from waterfall to agile, or even they just start out with agile, we typically still see waste, and risk is their handoffs as you go from your scoping to your high level designs to your story writing. And so there still could be waste even though you're doing agile today, but just want you to see every time there's a handoff from one tool to another or one team to another, there's potential risk of translation or loss of fidelity. All right. So the one takeaway I want you to have for waterfall is how people that are really good at waterfall, they get what's called PMBOK certified or PMI certified. That's the project management body of knowledge. And again, it's for the work is for very clearly defined scope with a known budget and a start date and an end date. So, and these folks are very good at that kind of activity. They are not good generally at doing agile delivery. So it's a different mindset. The simple approach is this 10-step project management. And this is a simpler view of the PMI approach, or the project management body of work. Is up front as you define the work, then you build a schedule and you build a budget. And then you manage your schedule and budget. That's what your project manager does. You deal with issues, you deal with scope. So there's always some kind of change request if you change scope, because it will completely change the schedule and the budget. You're managing the communications. How do you manage the communications to the stakeholders, whether it's the owner or the customer or anybody else involved in the project? Managing risks. And again, risks are things that have not yet happened. Issues are things that have happened that you need to deal with. The project manager is dealing with the human resources because they are bringing different resources in and out. And they're also dealing with the quality and the metrics. They may also be dealing with procurement, whether you're buying hardware, software, or using a third-party firm. You could argue that's human resources. Those are all the activities often that fall on the project manager, sometimes an engineering manager. So items on the left are plan the work, items on the right are work the plan. Okay. So you will need to do waterfall at some time. Almost all of you raised your hands that you are doing waterfall, but just at a high level, think through these activities of when you're doing it, that you've done these kind of steps. This is also why it's sometimes difficult to manage waterfall in a tool like Jira. And if you see a waterfall tool, it's hard for a waterfall tool to take on agile work. So by just quick show of hands, are any of you using separate tools for waterfall and agile?
Nobody.
Nobody? Okay. All right. We're almost done. The term portfolio management is something we haven't introduced yet, but portfolio is the concept of, and this definition is all of the work, because your teams, all of you said your teams are doing project work, they're doing reoccurring programs, they're doing ad hoc requests, emergencies, and they're delivering features. The portfolio is the managing of all of that work coming in to your team. And when you get into portfolio management, you have to think about the overall demand management, which is all of this work coming in. Remember, you have product work, which should be focused on OKRs, and it should have quarterly planning, and then it should get down to individual epics and then into stories. So that's Agile. Waterfall, you can see those coming generally, and you've got all that work. So that's the demand coming in for all the work on your team. Supply management is kind of similar to resource and capacity planning, but that's really, do I have all the people I need to do the work? It's not just a durable team. Do I need to get third parties? And so I need to try to manage supply and demand. Once those match, then that is delivery management and making sure you deliver all of those different kind of work patterns. And across the board, you're trying to manage risk the whole time. So this is the view of portfolio management as you're managing all those kind of works. And we might add a session at the end of this or in a next round to go into each of these a bit more. But as your teams get big, when you get into the 50 engineers and more, you need to start thinking this way. So if you think you're going to get to this size, we want you to start thinking about this portfolio management view of how do I manage all of those different kind of work products for the same team, and how do I shift the work around? One thing we didn't address, but on those resource views, if you can, try to minimize your teams doing more than 2 or 3 kinds of work. If you see them doing 4 or 5, if you can, try to either add resources or shift work around, because it's a lot of context switching to do all that kind of work. So we've updated the V model that's more of a view focused on product delivery versus waterfall. So on the far left, instead of requirements, you're strategically looking at your outcomes and key results. This is your long-term planning. How am I going to win a market? How are we going to get there? Those lead to your overall themes and epics, features and user stories, to the build, to CI/CD, with releases and telemetry, business metrics monitoring, and then ultimately analytics linking to usage. So this is the hypothesis-driven delivery. And my animations didn't work. And these are validating your hypotheses at each step along the way. And this is why you have business metric monitoring, for example, is tied back to your overall themes and epics. And your analytics is looking at, is it tying back to OKRs? Are people adopting the features? Are we signing up new customers? So this is how this is tied together. This does require annual and quarterly planning to keep lining up all those work buckets that we described, because the market changes, your team changes. So we typically reset about once a quarter. Sometimes you have to reset more frequently. And then you want to do just-in-time discovery. We didn't really put discovery in here, but you don't want to have too much discovery because that's wasted time and the market changes on you. You want to automate everything as possible to improve quality and time to market. And then you're trying to measure not everything possible, but just the things that really measure to make sure you're capturing, are we delivering what the market wants? So this is our V model approach here, tying all of the types of work that you do together back to our early work around OKRs. So that helps you as a team manage your workforce, instead of them just trying to figure out the 10 pounds of how am I going to do 10 pounds of work in a 5-pound bag. I'm going to distribute that work so that the right teams, the right people are pulling the most valuable stuff through the system overall. All right, covered a lot of stuff. I'll stay on for questions. We're shifting next week into product management, and this is for CTOs and engineers to understand how product managers are formally trained. Any questions or comments from the team? I understand if you need to drop right now, we're getting close to the end of time.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here with us.
Yeah.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
You bet. Have a good weekend.
You too. See you in 2 weeks.
All right.